The clock in the dining room ticked like a bomb, each second slicing through the silence. The table was cluttered with unpaid bills spilling from a worn leather folder, their sharp edges jutting out like blades ready to cut. The smell of stale coffee clung to the air, bitter and heavy, mixing with the faint medicine odor that seemed to follow her father everywhere these days. Bethany Carver's hands gripped the edge of the table, knuckles pale, as if holding on tight could stop their world from unraveling. Across from her, her mother twisted a napkin until it frayed, while her father sat slumped, his hollow eyes fixed on the same stack of papers that had haunted them for months. The doorbell rang. The sound pierced the suffocating stillness like a judge's gavel slamming down. Bethany's mother flinched, the fork slipping from her hand and clattering against the plate. "Who could that be at this hour?" she whispered, her voice frayed with exhaustion. Her father didn't move, his shoulders sagging, his gaze stubbornly fixed downward, as though refusing to acknowledge anything beyond the table could somehow hold back the inevitable. Bethany pushed back her chair. Her legs felt unsteady as she crossed the narrow hallway, her fingers brushing the chipped wallpaper as if to steady herself. She opened the door, and the night spilled in. Chicago's neon skyline glittering behind a man who looked as though he'd stepped out of a darker, sharper world. Victor Grayson. She'd seen his face in business journals, on magazine covers, always with headlines like "The Titan of Chicago" or "Grayson's Latest Conquest." He stood tall in a navy suit cut to perfection, his shoulders broad, his presence filling the doorway like a storm cloud. His eyes, cold and unblinking, scanned her face and then flicked past her into the house with predatory calm. "Miss Carver," he said, his voice low, smooth, deliberate. "May I come in?" Bethany's throat tightened. She stepped back without answering, her instincts screaming at her to slam the door, yet her body obeying some unspoken command in his tone. He entered, his polished shoes striking the worn wood floor, the sound echoing in the small space. The air shifted around him, heavier now, as if the room itself bent under his gravity. Her parents rose to their feet. Her mother smoothed her faded dress, a futile gesture, while her father tried to straighten his frail frame, coughing into his fist. Victor didn't sit. He stopped at the head of the table, a leather portfolio in hand, his gaze sweeping over the room, the sagging curtains, the flickering bulb, the scars of a family trying and failing to hold on. He placed the portfolio on the table, opening it with deliberate precision. A single sheet of paper slid across the wood, landing in front of Bethany with a soft, deadly thud. "I've purchased your family's debt," he said flatly. "Every cent. The loans, the mortgages, the credit lines. 1.3 million. They now belong to me." The room tilted. Bethany's mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, while her father gripped the table as if it could hold him upright. Bethany's heart slammed against her ribs, her breath refusing to come. "You what?" she managed, her voice breaking on the words. Victor's gaze found hers. His eyes were dark, relentless, like a hawk locking onto prey. "Your father owed the bank. Now he owes me, except I'm not here to collect." Bethany swallowed hard, her palms slick against the edge of the table. "Then why are you here?" He stepped closer, close enough that the faint scent of cedar and steel drifted from him, sharp and unsettling. His voice lowered, every word deliberate. "I'll clear it all. Every dollar. Your family will be free of this burden. In exchange?" He let the silence stretch, his eyes never leaving hers, until the weight of it pressed against her chest. "You will marry me. For 1 year." The words landed like chains snapping shut. Her mother choked on a sob. Her father's cough died in his throat, replaced by stunned silence. Bethany's knees threatened to buckle, but she locked them, forcing herself to stand tall though her insides screamed. She searched his face for mercy, for a crack in the icy mask, but all she saw was precision, calculation, obsession cloaked in control. 1 year, he repeated softly, his lips curving in the ghost of a smile. "Your choice, Miss Carver. But decide quickly. The clock is ticking." And suddenly, every beat of the dining room clock sounded like a hammer against her skull, counting down to a fate she never imagined. The courthouse smelled of disinfectant and old paper, a place where love had no place, and vows were reduced to signatures and stamps. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, a harsh reminder that nothing about this moment belonged to dreams or fairy tales. Bethany Carver stood rigid in a plain dress, her fingers cold around the pen that shook as she signed her name. Beside her, Victor Grayson towered, his navy suit, immaculate, his expression carved from stone. He did not glance at her, not once. His attention was fixed on the clerk who shuffled the documents as if this were just another contract. Bethany's heart thudded in her chest, louder than the ticking clock on the wall. This was her wedding day, if such a word could even be used. No music, no rings, no flowers, just silence, and a man who treated her life as if it were another acquisition. The clerk slid the papers into a file, his voice dry. "It's done. You're legally married now. Congratulations." He said it without emotion, without looking at either of them. Bethany wanted to laugh at the absurdity. Instead, she lifted her chin, forcing herself not to cry. Victor reached for her hand, not in affection, but in possession. His grip was firm, unyielding, as he guided her toward the doors outside. The flash of cameras exploded again. Missed her eyes, the cold September air slicing across her skin. Reporters swarmed their path, shouting questions. "Mrs. Grayson, how does it feel to marry the city's most powerful CEO? Is it true this was a sudden decision? Did you know each other long?" She froze, her lips parting without sound, before Victor's arm slid around her waist, pulling her close. "Smile," he murmured low enough that only she could hear. The warmth of his breath brushed her ear sharp as a command. She forced her lips into something resembling a smile, though her eyes burned. The next second, his hand cupped her jaw and he kissed her. Firm, deliberate, possessive. It stole the air from her lungs and drew gasps from the crowd. The cameras clicked faster, each flash like a gunshot. He pulled back his thumb, grazing her lip before he turned to the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, meet my wife, Bethany Grayson." The sound of her new name on his lips felt like a brand, searing her skin. Her stomach twisted as the reporters roared louder, shouting questions, firing accusations. Victor's grip never loosened. His hand anchored her at his side as he steered her toward the sleek black car waiting at the curb. Inside the Bentley, silence fell thick. The city's neon lights streaked past the tinted windows, painting fractured colors across her pale face. Bethany stared at her reflection ghost-like in the glass, her throat tight with words she could not speak. Victor broke the silence with a single sentence. "You belong to me now." His voice was soft but carried the weight of an iron door, locking shut. She turned to him, anger flashing in her eyes. "I agreed, for 1 year. For my family, that's all." His lips curved faintly, not quite a smile. "You'll find, Bethany, that deals have a way of changing once you're inside them." His gaze lingered on her face, heavy and unyielding. She looked away, heart hammering her mind, racing with questions she dared not ask. Why her? Why now? What game? Was he truly playing? When the car swept into the private garage of Grayson Tower, the skyscraper loomed above them, its glass walls reflecting the storm inside her. Victor helped her out, his hand resting lightly at her back, but the weight of it burned. The marble lobby glittered with chandeliers and polished steel, every surface echoing wealth and power. People turned to look, their eyes wide with curiosity and judgment. Bethany felt their stares like knives cutting through the thin armor of her composure. In the private elevator, Victor stood close, too close. His presence filled the small space until she could barely breathe. He did not speak. He simply watched her reflection in the mirrored walls as the floor numbers ticked higher. At last, he leaned closer, his lips near her ear. 1 year, he said. But make no mistake, Bethany. You are mine from the first second until the very last. The elevator dinged, the doors sliding open to reveal a penthouse of glass and moonlight, a gilded cage where the cold CEO's obsession was only beginning to unfold. The ballroom shimmered with crystal light, and the low hum of Chicago's elite filled the air. 1,000 eyes glittered behind champagne flutes and designer masks, each one sharp, each one waiting to judge Bethany Grayson. She stood at Victor's side, her silver gown clinging like a second skin, her spine locked straight, though her pulse thundered in her throat. Victor's hand tightened around her waist, not harsh, but firm enough to remind her she was not standing here alone or free. His lips brushed her ear as he spoke softly. "Smile, Bethany. They are watching." The command rolled through her in a whisper that was both velvet and iron. She forced her lips upward, a fragile mask as the cameras turned their lenses on her. The flashes were blinding, drowning her in light and noise. And then, without warning, Victor turned her toward him, his hand cradling her jaw, and his mouth covered hers. The kiss was fierce, deliberate. It stole the breath from her chest and sent a murmur racing through the crowd. Reporters gasped, voices rising in a frenzy, as cameras clicked like gunfire. She froze, her hands trembling at her sides while Victor's thumb brushed her lower lip. When he pulled back, his smile cut sharp across the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, meet my wife, Bethany Grayson." The words crashed into her like a tidal wave. Wife. Her heart pounded fury, fear and something else curling in her chest. The crowd erupted, their whispers slicing her like glass. Who is she? Where did she come from? A nobody married to a billionaire. Overnight. She was no longer Bethany Carver, the desperate daughter of a sick man. She was Victor Grayson's wife, displayed like a jewel at the heart of the city's most glittering gala. Victor guided her through the sea of faces, his grip unrelenting. Polished smiles greeted them, but Bethany felt the undercurrent of venom. The board members and investors looked at her with curiosity, sharp as scalpels, their wives with suspicion, their daughters with disdain. She forced herself to keep her head high, but the weight of their stares pressed against her lungs. The night stretched into a blur of handshakes, laughter, and champagne. Victor never once letting her stray, his arm an iron band at her waist, his eyes burning every time she faltered. Near midnight, as the orchestra swelled and chandeliers threw shards of light across the marble floors, Bethany caught sight of herself in one of the mirrored walls, a pale figure in silver gown, lips tingling from a kiss that had felt like both possession and warning. Her reflection looked like a stranger. When the gala finally ended, Victor led her to the waiting car. The door shut, and silence fell, except for the hum of the engine. The city lights raced past in streaks, Bethany's reflection hovering in the window like a ghost. Victor's gaze never left. "You did well tonight," he said, his voice low and edged with something she could not name. She turned her face to him, bitterness tightening her chest. "Did I have a choice?" His lips curved faintly, not quite a smile. "You always have a choice, Bethany. You simply keep making the one that binds you to me." The words wrapped around her like chains, soft but unbreakable. She looked away, her heart hammering, her mind screaming questions. Why her? Why this deal? Why his eyes lingered too long on her face, as if she were not a pawn, but the only piece that mattered. The car slid into the underground garage, the penthouse looming above them. Victor stepped out first, extending his hand, not as a gentleman, but as a man claiming what was his. Bethany hesitated, the weight of his gaze pinning her until at last she placed her hand in his. His fingers closed tight, a vow without words. A shiver ran through her as she realized the contract she signed was only the beginning. The cold CEO had marked her before the world, and there was no escape from the storm he was about to unleash. The penthouse rose like a palace of glass above the Chicago skyline, yet inside its walls the silence pressed heavy. Bethany woke to it each morning, a silence broken only by the faint tick of the city far below. The marble floors gleamed so bright they reflected her unease. The vast windows threw her image back at her, a girl who had been sold into a life that glittered like a jewel and felt like a cage. Victor Grayson moved through the space as if he owned not only the penthouse, but the air itself. He rarely raised his voice yet. His presence carried more weight than thunder. When he entered the kitchen one morning, his shirt unbuttoned at the collar, his dark hair tousled, Bethany nearly dropped her coffee. His gaze found her instantly sharp, then softer in a way that unsettled her. "Morning," he said simply, as if the word itself carried a claim. She bristled, clutching the mug tighter. "Shouldn't you be at the office running your empire?" He chuckled, the sound low, his hand brushing her arm as he passed. The contact was fleeting, but it set her pulse racing. "I canceled my meetings," he said without apology. "I wanted to see you first." The words crawled under her skin, twisting into something she could not define. She stepped back, her spine pressing into the counter. Victor closed the space, his eyes lingering on her face, as if memorizing it. "You should not be doing this," she whispered, her voice sharper than she meant. "You said 1 year. That was the deal." His head tilted, studying her like a puzzle he had all the time in the world to solve. "And what do you think this is?" he murmured. His fingers traced lightly along her wrist, a line of heat that left her breathless. She jerked her hand back, glaring. "You are supposed to be cold, distant, not this. Whatever this is." A faint smile curved his lips. "You think I am cold." He leaned closer, his breath grazing her ear. "I have been burning since the night I first saw you. Bethany, I can work entire markets into my control, but I cannot think straight when you are in the room." Before she could answer, his mouth claimed hers. The kiss was unyielding, searing. It pulled her under until the world blurred, and all she could feel was the press of his lips, the steel of his hands framing her face. She gasped, pushing him back, trembling. "You don't get to do this," she said, her voice breaking. "You don't get to act like I am yours." Victor's eyes darkened, not with anger, but with something deeper, possessive and dangerous. "You are mine," he said softly. For 1 year, that was the deal. Her knees weakened, her chest tightened. The words branded her. She wanted to scream, yet her body remembered the kiss too vividly. "Get dressed," he said after a long pause. His tone shifted from velvet to steel. "I want you at the office today." Her eyes widened. "Why, I am not your assistant." His gaze softened, but his jaw stayed firm. "No, you are not, but I want you there. Humor me." That afternoon, Bethany sat across from his desk at Grayson Enterprises. The walls of glass overlooked the city, sprawling like a chessboard of power. Victor spoke into the phone, his tone clipped and commanding, yet his eyes strayed to her again and again, lingering on her lips, on the curve of her neck. She crossed her arms, fighting the heat in her cheeks. When the call ended, he leaned forward, his gaze piercing. "You look bored." She lifted her chin. "I am not here to be entertained. What do you want?" "Victor, really?" He rose, circling the desk until he stood before her. His fingers brushed her wrist lightly. This time, not claiming just touching. "I want you to understand me," he said low. "This deal was never about debt." Her breath caught her defenses rising. Then what was it about? His thumb traced her pulse point, where her heart betrayed her racing beat. "You," he said simply. The word hung in the air, heavier than glass, shattering. Bethany's chest constricted, her thoughts spiraling. He had noticed her long before this contract. She could see it in his eyes. Obsession cloaked in control. She stared at him, trembling between defiance and a pull she could no longer deny. The cold CEO was no longer a stranger. He was a storm, and she was already standing in its path. The restaurant glittered with chandeliers and whispered ambition. Investors leaned over crystal glasses, their laughter sharp as knives, while reporters circled like vultures waiting for scraps of scandal. Bethany sat at Victor's side, her emerald gown tight across her ribs, her smile polished but fragile. She felt like a borrowed accessory, a decoration for the cold CEO who never let go of her hand. Victor looked every inch the untouchable king, his dark suit sculpted to perfection, his voice smooth and commanding as he charmed a silver-haired investor. Yet his eyes strayed to her again and again, a tether invisible but undeniable. Bethany's stomach knotted on the weight of it. The stares from the crowd were suffocating, some curious, some cruel. The whispered question on every lip was the same. Why her? The answer arrived in the form of a woman who walked into the dining room like she owned the air. Cassandra Lyle, blonde hair cascading in waves, her crimson dress clinging like fire, her smile sharp enough to draw blood. Conversations stuttered, heads turned, and whispers trailed in her wake. Bethany's chest tightened. She knew that face. Everyone did. Victor's ex-model turned influencer, infamous for her tearful interviews and cryptic posts about betrayal. Cassandra's eyes locked onto her with predatory precision. Then she moved straight toward Victor, Her hand brushed his arm, her laugh, bright, brittle, rehearsed. Victor's expression did not flicker, but his eyes cut briefly to Bethany, a flash of something dangerous. Cassandra leaned closer, whispering, but the smile never left her lips. When she finally turned her gaze back to Bethany, the room seemed to still. "Bethany, is it?" Cassandra's voice was sweet as poisoned honey, carrying just loud enough for every ear at the table. The new Mrs. Grayson. How quaint. Her gaze slid down Bethany's gown, dismissive, cruel. "I heard you married Victor to save your family's little situation." How noble. Most girls would have simply asked for a check. A ripple of gasps moved through the crowd. Forks stilled, wine glasses trembled. Bethany's cheeks burned, but she lifted her chin, steadying her voice, and most people, she said evenly, would have the decency not to air gossip at a dinner they were never invited to. The silence that followed cracked like ice. A few investors murmured approval, but Cassandra's smile only widened, her eyes narrowing to slits. "Oh, sweetheart," Cassandra purred. "I don't need an invitation. Victor and I go way back. Don't we, darling?" Her hand lingered on his sleeve. Her laugh rang out like glass breaking. The weight of every stare bore down on Bethany, her throat tightening, her fingers trembling around her champagne glass. She wanted to spit back to remind Cassandra that she was not a pawn, but the words clung to her tongue, refusing to escape. Then Victor moved. His presence cleaved through the tension like a blade. He stepped close, his hand lifting to cup Bethany's face, warm, steady, deliberate. In front of every investor, every journalist, every enemy, he kissed her. The press of his lips was fierce, a vow, a claim. Cameras flashed like lightning, the sound of shutters exploding across the room. Bethany's breath caught, her body trembling, caught between resistance and surrender. When he pulled back, his eyes locked on hers, fierce, unyielding. Then he turned to the crowd, his voice a dark command. "Bethany is my wife. Anyone who questions her questions me, and I do not take kindly to it." The words thundered through the room, leaving no space for rebuttal. Cassandra's smile faltered, her face paling beneath the chandelier's glow. Her mask cracked for the first time. The investors nodded, some with admiration, some with fear. The journalists scribbled feverishly. Cassandra's lips parted, but no words came. Her heels clicked sharp against the marble. As she spun away, her exit as dramatic as her entrance. The door shut behind her with finality. The dinner resumed, but the air hummed with the ghost of what had just unfolded. Bethany sat frozen, her skin still tingling from Victor's kiss, her chest a storm of confusion. Gratitude battled with anger, fear with something she refused to name. In the sleek black car later, silence pressed between them. Victor's gaze burned steady on her. "Why did you do that?" she whispered finally. "Defend me, kiss me." His eyes glowed like embers in the dark. "Because I don't care what anyone says," he said, his voice low, raw. "You're mine, Bethany. Not for show, not for a year. Mine." The city lights raced past, but Bethany's world tilted with the weight of his words. A chain and a promise all at once. Her heart hammered and she turned away, hiding the truth that scared her most. She wanted to leave him. The morning after the dinner, the headlines spread like wildfire across Chicago. Victor Grayson's surprise bride, the mystery woman who captured the cold CEO's attention. Photographs of his hand at Bethany's waist, his lips on hers, under the chandelier were plastered across every gossip site. Some called it a fairy tale, others sharpened their knives. "Gold digger," one headline screamed. "Sham marriage," another whispered. The words burned into Bethany's chest, no matter how many times she put her phone down. Victor moved through it with unnerving calm. His office became a fortress of glass and steel. Reporters clustered outside like vultures waiting for scraps. He barely seemed to notice their noise. Yet whenever Bethany crossed the room, his eyes followed her steady, unblinking. The world might have been questioning their marriage, but in his gaze, she saw no doubt, only a relentless claim. By evening, new stories surfaced. The photographs were grainy, but damning enough. Victor Grayson leaving a hotel late at night, a blonde figure slipping out the side door, Cassandra. The implication was clear. His marriage was a cover, and he still belonged to her. The internet caught fire with speculation. The betrayed wife narrative spread faster than truth. Bethany's stomach turned at every cruel comment, her hand trembling as she scrolled. She wanted to throw the phone across the room, but her pulse whispered doubt. What if the world was right? On the balcony of the penthouse, the city glittered below. Bethany stood with the cool wind lifting her hair. Victor stepped out behind her, his warmth closing in, his arms wrapped around her, his chin settling against her shoulder. "You've seen it," he said, not a question. His voice was low, roughened by something deeper than anger. She nodded, her eyes locked on the skyline. "She is trying to tear us apart. Let her try." His voice tightened like steel. "She has no power here, Bethany." T earned in his arms, pressing her palms against his chest, searching his eyes. "Is it true?" she whispered. The question trembled, but she needed the answer. "Did you see her?" His gaze darkened, not with guilt, but with fury. His hands cupped her face, steady, unyielding. "Bethany, there is no one else. There has not been anyone since you." The conviction in his voice cut through her doubt, but the world's noise still throbbed like a wound. Inside the next day, Victor's office became a war room. His PR team drafted statements, headlines streamed across screens. His jaw was set, his voice clipped as he paced the length of the desk. "Find her," he ordered. "I want Cassandra here today." The air around him crackled with danger. Bethany sat across from him, twisting the silver ring on her finger, her chest a storm. She knew what it meant to summon Cassandra into his world again. It would not be a civil conversation. Victor's ruthlessness in boardrooms was legend. What would it look like when turned on the woman who had once held his heart? By noon he was gone, his Bentley slicing through traffic, leaving her alone in the penthouse. She wandered restless, her stomach knotted until the sound of his return made her heart leap. Victor entered his eyes, burning, his jaw clenched. "She is finished," he said, dropping his keys with a clatter. "I told her if she breathes another lie, I will bury her. I will drag her through every court in this city. She knows I don't bluff." Bethany's breath caught his fury wrapping around her like fire. "What did she say?" He stepped closer, his hands closing over her shoulders, firm, protective. "She said nothing when I was done with her." He paused, his eyes softening only when they searched her face. "You are mine, Bethany. No one touches what is mine." The press conference was called for dusk. Grayson Enterprises lobby transformed into a stage. Reporters packed the space, their cameras flashing against the glass walls. Victor stepped to the podium, Bethany at his side, her black dress a quiet defiance. The city lights sprawled, while behind them, as if bearing witness, Victor's voice carried steady over the crowd. "Recent stories have questioned my marriage. Let me be clear, they are lies. My wife is not a convenience or a transaction. She is my choice, my partner, my future." He pulled her closer, their hands entwined his lips, brushing hers before the storm of cameras. This time the kiss was not performance, it was a promise, a vow carved into the air for the world to see. The crowd erupted, but Bethany barely heard them. Her heart pounded against his chest as his arm anchored her. She had never felt more exposed or more shielded all at once. In that moment, with the world watching, she realized the cold CEO was not just defending his name, he was defending her, and he would burn everything to ash if anyone tried to take her away. The penthouse was drenched in the golden glow of dusk when Bethany first realized the walls of her carefully built defenses were beginning to crack. She stood by the window, her hand pressed against the glass as the city pulsed below. Victor entered quietly, his tie loosened, his eyes fixed on her as though she were the only thing that existed. She turned, expecting another command, another cold remark. Instead, he crossed the space slowly, his movements unhurried, deliberate, and when he stopped in front of her, his voice was softer than she had ever heard. "You still do not see it, do you?" he murmured. She frowned, confusion and suspicion colliding. "See what? That you were never a choice born from convenience or desperation," he said, his thumb brushing the edge of her wrist. "You think I married you to settle a debt? But Bethany, I saw you long before that night. I saw you at the charity gala a year ago. You wore a green dress. Your father was laughing beside you, and I could not look away." The memory jolted her. She remembered that night, her father still healthy, her laughter still unburdened. She had not noticed him. Caught in the crush of strangers, yet he had noticed her. The thought sent a shiver down her spine. His obsession had roots deeper than she realized. "You orchestrated this," she whispered, her voice cracking. "You set the trap long before my family even fell." Victor's gaze did not falter. "I waited because I had to. But when the chance came, I would not lose you." Her heart thundered the confession, stealing her breath. His obsession was no accident. It was calculated, carved into the foundations of her life. She wanted to recoil, yet some part of her quivered at the depth of his need. She turned away, unable to meet his eyes, her hand trembling against the glass. "You do not know what you are doing," she said brokenly. "This is not love, it is control." Behind her, Victor's voice was low but searing. "I control everything. Bethany markets rivals, entire empires. But you I cannot control. You are the one thing I crave, not as a conquest, but as my undoing." The words sank into her like molten steel. She spun to face him, her chest rising and falling, her lips parted with 1,000 protests, but none escaped. He closed the distance, cupping her face, his touch reverent, desperate. His mouth covered hers, and the kiss was different this time. Not a performance, not a claim. It was raw, a storm breaking over them. She clutched his shirt, her body betraying her, leaning into him before she tore herself back, gasping. "Stop," she whispered, trembling. "This is not supposed to happen. You are supposed to be the jailer, not the man who makes me forget myself." His eyes burned with unyielding fire. "And yet you do not pull away," he said quietly. "And you do not stop me." Her knees weakened as his words echoed truth she could not admit. The silence between them thickened, heavy with the weight of what they both knew. Outside the city roared neon and noise, but in the penthouse only their breathing remained. That night, Bethany lay awake in the vast bed, the sheets cool against her skin, Victor asleep beside her, his hand resting over her waist, even in dreams. She stared at the ceiling, her chest aching with fear and a forbidden longing. He had confessed what she had not wanted to believe. She was not a pawn picked in desperation. She had been chosen, hunted, wanted, and though her mind screamed for escape, her heart betrayed her with every frantic beat. The cold CEO had unmasked his obsession, and she was beginning to wonder if she could ever walk away from it. The message came on a gray October morning, when the sky hung low over the city. Bethany's phone buzzed across the marble counter, a single line flashing on the screen. "Meeting at 11, the Drake Hotel. Urgent about Victor's business. CL." Her chest tightened. Cassandra Lyle. The initials cut through her like glass. She should have ignored it. Victor had already warned her that Cassandra was finished, yet the thought gnawed at her. If Cassandra had one more scheme, one more trap, could she really stand by and do nothing? She told herself it was to protect Victor, not because doubt still coiled in her veins. She dressed quickly, a navy blouse stretched across her growing bump, slacks clinging at the hips. She told the driver to be discreet, no word to Victor. The Bentley slipped through the streets past the churn of Lake Michigan until the Drake loomed in stone and shadow. The lobby smelled of lilies and polished wood. Bethany's heels clicked softly across the marble as she followed Cassandra's instructions to the 3rd floor. Suite 312. The door was ajar. A hush lay inside the dim room. She stepped forward and the door slammed shut behind her, the lock snapping like a trap. Her pulse leapt. She spun, pulling at the handle, but it would not move. The room was bare save for a single window framing the skyline. Her phone showed no signal, the screen mocking her. Panic rose sharp in her throat. Footsteps approached, and then Cassandra stood framed in the doorway, her smile like a blade, blonde hair pulled back, crimson lips curling with victory. "Oh, Bethany, you are so predictable," she purred. 2 men in dark suits flanked their security badges glinting as they stepped inside, blocking the only exit. Cassandra walked closer, her heels clicking slow, deliberate. "I warned you. You were never meant to last. You are a placeholder, a charity case in a borrowed crown." Bethany's hand went instinctively to her stomach, protective fire flashing in her veins. "What do you want?" she demanded. Cassandra's eyes glittered cold. "To remind you who Victor belongs to," she said. "You think you can keep him, but you will never be enough." Bethany's heart raced, her mind darting to the window, the fire escape, but before she could move, a voice cut through the tension. Enough. The room shifted as Victor strode inside, fury radiating from every step. Behind him, his own security spread like a shield, his presence eclipsing Cassandra's menace, his eyes locked on Bethany, first searching her face, his hand reaching for hers. "You are safe," he whispered before turning his rage on Cassandra. "You are finished," he said, his voice low like thunder. "You will never come near her again." Cassandra's mask faltered, but she forced a laugh. "Victor, darling, this is all a misunderstanding. Save it." His tone sharpened, one word, a blade. "Step away from my wife." The two men shifted uneasily as Victor's security advanced. Cassandra's defiance cracked under his stare. "You cannot erase me," she hissed. Victor's lips curved in something colder than a smile. "Watch me. One more move against her and I will bury you, your followers, your brand. Your name will be ash." Cassandra's breath hitched as his men took her arms, dragging her protests into silence. The door slammed, leaving only the echo of her heels fading down the hall. Victor turned back, his fury melting into desperate concern. He pulled Bethany into his arms, his hands cupping her face, his breath unsteady. "I am here. You are safe." She clung to him, her knees weak, the adrenaline crashing through her. What if she had? He silenced her with a fierce kiss, raw, protective. "No one touches you," he murmured against her lips. "No one." As he held her close, Bethany's tears slipped free. Her heart pounded, not only with fear, but with the startling truth. The cold CEO's obsession was not just possession, it was protection, and for the first time she wondered if she was no longer his captive but his entire world. The first wave of nausea hit at dawn. Bethany stumbled from the bed, her hand clamped over her mouth as she rushed to the bathroom. The marble floor was cold under her feet, her reflection pale and frightened in the mirror. It was not the first morning like this, and dread coiled deep in her chest. She sank onto the edge of the tub, her fingers trembling against her lips. The truth pressed in on her, heavy and undeniable. She slipped out of the penthouse before Victor woke, his steady breathing, a reminder of the fortress he had built around her. The pharmacy down the street was a blur of fluorescent light and antiseptic. She fumbled with the box, her heart hammering all the way back to the penthouse. In the bathroom, the plastic test trembled in her hand. Each second that ticked by felt like an eternity until two faint pink lines appeared. She dropped onto the tile, her breath breaking, pregnant. The word thundered in her skull. Her hand slid to her stomach. Instinctive, protective. She thought of Victor, his power, his obsession. Would he believe it was an accident, or would he see it as a trap? The day passed in a haze. She forced a smile at breakfast as Victor kissed her forehead, his hand lingering at the small of her back. She nodded through conversations, but her mind screamed with the secret she carried. That night, they attended a charity auction, the ballroom glowing with chandeliers. Bethany sipped ginger ale while others lifted champagne. Victor's arm was around her, his voice charming the crowd, but every time his fingers brushed her waist, she felt the weight of what she had not told him. Back at the penthouse, he loosened his tie, his eyes softer than she expected. "You've been quiet all night," he said. "What's wrong?" Her throat closed, but she could not hide anymore. She turned to the window, the city glittering beyond the glass. "Victor," she whispered, her voice breaking. "There's something I need to tell you." He crossed the room instantly, his hand brushing her arm, grounding her. "Tell me." The words spilled raw, trembling. "I'm pregnant." The silence that followed was sharp and endless. She braced for doubt, for anger, but his expression shattered instead. Tears filled his dark eyes, his hands cradling her face. "Bethany," he breathed, his voice rough with awe. "You're serious?" She nodded, tears spilling over her own cheeks. In the next moment, he lifted her into his arms, spinning her gently, laughter breaking from him for the first time. "A baby," he whispered against her skin. "Our baby." His lips covered hers, fierce and trembling. He set her down, his hands still cupping her cheeks. Mad, you ask? Mad? He shook his head. I have never been happier. The weeks that followed changed everything. Victor's protectiveness grew into a tidal wave. He attended every appointment, his large hand covering hers, as the rapid flutter of their child's heartbeat filled the room. His lips pressed reverently to the barely visible swell of her stomach. In public, he silenced gossip by kissing her bump in the middle of a fundraiser, his hand firm at her back. He refused to let her lift anything heavier than a mug. His eyes glowed with pride whenever he looked at her and the life she carried. But with joy came new dangers. The world watched closer, the headlines shifting from scandal to obsession. Victor Grayson's heir, whispers spread through the city. Paparazzi hunted their every step. Bethany lay awake some nights, curled against him, his arm heavy across her waist, her heart torn between fear and hope. She had entered this marriage to save her family, but now she was bound by something deeper, something real. The cold CEO had become a man undone by love and the child they had created together, and she could no longer pretend that she did not feel the same pull that had already consumed him. The contractions came before sunrise, sharp and merciless. Bethan. He doubled over the kitchen counter, her mug of tea slipping from her hand and shattering against the marble. Victor was at her side in an instant, his eyes wide, his voice tight with urgency. It's time, Bethany. He scooped her into his arms, ignoring her protests, his jaw set as the Bentley tore through the Chicago streets. The city blurred past neon and steel, but Bethany saw only him, his hand gripping hers, his forehead pressed to hers, whispering over and over, I love you. You are strong, I am here. The delivery room became a storm of pain and promise. Bethany's body trembled with every wave, but Victor never left her side. His lips brushed her damp hair, his hands steady against hers. You've got this. We've got this. His voice anchored her through the chaos. Hours stretched into eternity until at last a cry split the air, fierce and tiny. The nurse placed their daughter in her arms, a perfect bundle with dark eyes and a wisp of hair. Victor's face broke, tears streaming as he kissed the baby's forehead, then Bethany's. My girls. My whole life. In the hospital, he refused to leave their side. He slept in the chair beside her bed, his hand curled around hers, their newborn cradled between them. The city hummed beyond the window, but inside was quiet, sacred. Bethany looked at Victor, his face softened by exhaustion, his eyes still burning with awe, and she knew she was no longer bound by a deal. She was bound by love, forged in fire and tested by obsession. Weeks later, the Peninsula Hotel glittered for Grayson Enterprises' anniversary gala. The ballroom shimmered with orchids and chandeliers, the air heavy with perfume and power. Bethany stood at the edge of the crowd, her sapphire gown catching the light. Their daughter Leia nestled in her arms. The baby's tiny hand curled around her finger, grounding her against the storm of attention. Victor's parents lingered near the bar, their gazes cool, their approval still uncertain. Reporters whispered, investors waited, and Bethany felt the weight of the spotlight settle on her. Victor crossed the room, his presence commanding in his tailored suit. His eyes found hers, a tether across the chaos. He extended his hand, silent but sure. She hesitated, Leia shifting softly in her arms, but his smile drew her forward. The crowd parted as he led her to the stage, the spotlight bathing them in gold. Victor's arm slipped around her waist as he faced the microphone. Tonight we honor decades of Grayson legacy, he began, his voice resonant, but I stand here to speak of another legacy. I once believed marriage could be a transaction, a deal made for convenience. I was wrong. I married Bethany Carver for business, but she became my reason for everything. His words rippled through the room, drawing gasps and whispers. He turned to her, his hand cupping her cheek, his eyes raw with truth. You changed me. You gave me a home, a daughter, a life worth more than empires. You are my world. Bethany, I would choose you 1,000 times over. Tears blurred her vision as the crowd erupted, applause crashing like thunder. Cameras flashed, capturing every angle, but Bethany saw only him. She laughed through her tears as Leia stirred against her chest. Victor kissed her forehead, then turned back to the microphone. This company is my past, but Bethany and Laya are my future. He reached into his jacket, producing a single envelope. He handed it to the board. Key. Air, his voice steady. I am signing over controlling shares of Grayson Enterprises to my wife tonight because she saved me. The room froze. Shock rippled through the air as investors and journalists scrambled. Victor ignored them. His attention remained fixed on Bethany, his hand tightening around hers. His smile was unguarded, fierce proud. The cold CEO who once traded hearts like contracts had just surrendered everything in front of the world. The quartet began a slow melody as Victor guided her to the dance floor, still holding Leia. The crowd swirled around them, blurred by the shimmer of chandeliers and the roar of applause. Bethany rested her head against his shoulder, her tears glinting like jewels against the sapphire fabric. I love you, she whispered, the words breaking free at last. His lips brushed her temple, his embrace tightening. I love you too. You are everything. They swayed together, their daughter between them. The city lights blazing beyond the glass windows. A constellation of hope. The past was gone. The contract broken. What remained was choice, devotion, and a love powerful enough to consume them both. In Victor's arms, Bethany finally knew she was no longer a pawn in his game. She was his partner, his obsession, and his forever.